Property Tribes on location at the Property Investor Show Spring 2017. I'm here with John Corey. And John, we were just having a conversation off camera and it's kind of sparked this interview topic because we thought it would be a good idea to talk about equity.
Yes.
And really go back to basics because it has a lot of connotations in property investment, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I've been doing some presentations to try to raise awareness somewhat related to Section 24, and people are going to have to use less debt and more equity. So I have a question in my monthly meeting and in my other presentations about what is debt, and almost every property investor knows what debt is, and they can quote all kinds of things. And then I say, so what is equity? And they really stumble. And eventually we get to some definition. Maybe it's the difference between the value of the property and the debt on it. But I also then highlight it's also cash in the bank, it's other assets, it may be your brand, your reputation, your ability to deliver, your team of builders or whatever. So then I'll typically be doing the presentation and I'll go along and we'll get to some point and I'll be talking about crowdfunding and equity crowdfunding. And then someone says, so what's the interest rate? And it's like, we're talking about equity. There's no interest rate on equity. There may be a return, but there's no interest rate. And again, particularly the successful property investors tend to be locked into how they do deals, and they're very much focused that way. And then the newbies tend to be, they might know what equity is, but they don't really get it. And they're so wired into think about loan terms and debt and borrowing from an institution. So it's a very funny conversation that people don't understand. Equity is a lot of things, it particularly cash or the cash in the deal, but it might also be your value to the team and your value to the whole overall success. And you can, like Silicon Valley, you can create equity value by having a well-run project.
Talk a little bit about equity in the term, in the kind of context of crowdfunding.
So there's two types of crowdfunding according to the FCA. There's debt-related crowdfunding, and then there's equity-related. So equity in the case of crowdfunding would be shares in a company which actually owns the asset. So if it's a property that you and I were doing a project with, and we then went to the crowd, we would sell shares in the company, the SPV, and that SPV would actually have ownership of the title of the property.
Yep.
Maybe there's going to be debt used for the project, maybe not. And the crowd is putting in the equity that sits above that debt, or if there's no debt, the crowd's putting in all the cash. Recent campaign we did, it was all cash, there's no debt, $15,000 was raised. Other campaigns, there's a mix of debt and equity. Nicole Bremner's deals tend to have around 50% debt and 50% equity. And that's how they get their deals done, is the crowd is able to invest legally. You're able to share information legally if you follow the regulations, as opposed to all this stuff that happens on Facebook.
Indeed, and I think the other thing to say about equity is that you can actually borrow against it, you can get bridging against it if you have significant equity in your portfolio.
Yes.
So it's a very important thing for landlords not only to understand but also how they can utilize it to help them grow.
2 points there. One is the equity is your skin in the game, and it may be skin from your other property. Second of all, if you wanted to do a new deal, it might be better to have the crowd replace some of your money that's in your prior deal, where the numbers are certain, controls certain, and then you take the cash that you receive from that to put in the new deal, because there is some timing issues, and the crowd might like to invest in something they're sure of, that's up and running, that's already functioning, rather than the new thing.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it. Also, with respect to Section 24, one of the most I suppose effective ways of dealing with it for a sole trader landlord is to look to pay down debt.
Yes.
And they could do that through selling a property that has equity. When they've redeemed the mortgage, they're left with some cash. They could use that cash to pay down other
Correct.
mortgages. So again, it's a good way to, it's actually a very good time in the history of buy-to-let to be looking at equity and understanding it and how you can use it.
Very complementary to what you just said. So if you had a portfolio, say, of 20 properties, and you're getting a little older, or you don't want to be so actively engaged in the property, would you rather have 10 tenants or 20 tenants for the same income? So if you can sell 10, pay the tax, take what's left, pay off the debt, and have 10 properties with 10 tenants for the same income and the same tax as you would have had if you had the 20, that can be a fine way forward. There is also one other thing I want to tie in. So on the crowdfunding, if people want to put them in the minimum amount on a deal, and they do that twice, then they become sophisticated as investors because they're learning as they're going. They might actually be able to invest for less than the cost of a course, but now emotionally they're in a deal. They're talking to the other investors. They get to see the list of who the other investors are. They get to actually follow the project. So instead of being, oh, I've spent so much money on training, but I haven't even started, now they can actually get started while they learn, and very bite-sized chunks.
I think that is a good way forwards, actually. Just to finish then, John, I know that you always a very big advocate of understanding numbers, because as we say, numbers never lie. There's another great interview about that. And I think it's really important that landlords have a spreadsheet. They have their all their details of their property, their mortgage, how much the property's worth. They know how much equity they've got in that regard. And to review that perhaps once a year and update it and be very clear on their position. And if there is equity to be used, they should perhaps look into doing it. And what ways can they do that?
Well, if they want to keep the property rather than sell it and get the equity that way, they could potentially refinance. They might be able to replace some of their equity with some of the crowds by selling down their position in the property, subject to the loan terms and other conditions. So essentially, they could also then use that asset as a bridging facility where they could get what is essentially just a loan, but they can do it on a temporary basis, 3 months, 6 months, 2 year, whatever, while they secure the next deal, get it up and running, replace that with permanent financing, pay off the bridging. So there's different ways to tap into it. At the same time, it might be wise just to leave the equity where it is, continue to have a relatively safe, secure investment with a lower LTV. You shouldn't always be maximizing your loan to value. That'll get you into trouble if there's a downdraft.
Right. Very good advice there. I think those days of kind of over-leveraging are well and truly over. So very interesting, John. Thank you so much for discussing this with me. And I hope you've got some insights into equity in the context of property here with John Corey. Thanks, John.
Thank you.